She walked into the most dangerous office in Seoul, carrying nothing but a manila folder and 7 years of controlled fury. No weapon, no bodyguard, no backup plan, just evidence that could bring down an empire, and a woman cold enough to use it. Kang Tae-hyun had ordered men broken for less than what she was about to do. He had watched prosecutors flinch, politicians beg, and rivals disappear. But when Amara Okafor sat down across from him at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning and slid that folder across his desk, the most feared man in South Korea did something nobody in the room had ever witnessed. He went completely still. If this story already has you locked in, hit that like button right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The call came at 3:47 a.m. Kang Tae-hyun was already awake. He almost always was at that hour. Not from insomnia, not from nightmares, though he'd earned plenty of those. He woke because his body had been trained over 20 years to treat sleep as a vulnerability. He lay on his back in the dark of his Hanam-dong penthouse, staring at the ceiling, running calculations the way other men counted breaths. Who owed what? Who was late? Who was getting ideas they shouldn't be getting? His phone lit up the bedside table. Unknown number, Seoul area code. He almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers at 3 a.m. were either amateur mistakes or deliberate provocations, and he had people for both. But something in the stillness of the room made him reach for it. Some instinct he couldn't name. Chairman Kang. The voice on the other end was female, low, and entirely too calm for the hour. Controlled in a way that told him immediately this was not a panicked person, not a drunk person, not someone running out of options. This was someone who had rehearsed. My name is Amara Okafor. I'm an attorney currently licensed in New York and temporarily registered with the Seoul Bar Association. I'm calling to inform you that I am in possession of certain documents you'll want to review before your day begins. Tae-hyun sat up. He didn't say anything. He'd learned long ago that silence was more useful than questions. People rushed to fill silence. They gave you things. Original land deeds from the Mapo District Development Corridor, circa 2017 and 2018, she continued. Financial transfer records connected to a dummy corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, and notarized statements from 2 witnesses who were present at a meeting between your legal counsel and officials from Kwon Sejun's development company 3 weeks before a Nigerian-Korean businessman named Chukwuemeka Okafor died in what was ruled an accidental fall from a construction site. Tae-hyun's jaw tightened. His hand on the phone didn't move, but the bones in his knuckles went white. My father, she said. Just those 2 words. Flat. Like she'd practiced not letting them break her voice. I'll be at your building at 9 o'clock, she continued. I'd recommend you cancel whatever you have scheduled. This conversation requires your full attention. The line went dead. He sat in the dark for a long time after that. His head of security, a compact, granite-faced man named Park Sung-min, had a full briefing ready by 5:30 a.m. Tae-hyun sat at his kitchen counter in a plain gray t-shirt, both hands wrapped around a coffee cup, and read through the file without expression. Amara Okafor, 31 years old, born in Lagos, raised partially in Seoul from age 9 through 16 when her father relocated the family to pursue business opportunities in South Korea. Attended Seoul International School on academic scholarship. Left South Korea at 18, 2 months after her father's death, with a full scholarship to Columbia University. Law degree from NYU at 25. Magna cum laude. Joined a mid-sized litigation firm in New York. Made junior partner in 3 years, which Sung-min had flagged with a small note, unusually fast track. She had no criminal record, no known associates in organized crime, no political affiliations. She had never, as far as Sung-min's team could determine in 4 hours, made any public statements about her father's death. 7 years of silence. Younger brother, Tae-hyun said, not looking up. Malik Okafor. Says here he's a minor. 17, Sung-min confirmed. Currently receiving treatment at Yonsei Severance Hospital. He and the mother, Adayeze Okafor, arrived in Seoul 6 weeks ago. The boy has leukemia. Third presentation. The treatment program here is, Sung-min checked his notes, a clinical trial, experimental. The waiting list in the States was 18 months. Tae-hyun set down his coffee. Tae-hyun sat down. He looked at the wall for a moment. Then he looked back at the file, at the photo of Amara Okafor that Sungmin's team had pulled from the NYU Law School alumni database. A young black woman in a formal portrait, eyes direct, jaw set, no smile that reached anywhere near warm. Even in a posed photograph, she looked like she was calculating something. She came back for her brother, Tae-hyun said. That appears to be the primary reason, yes. And she's using the time here to come after me. That would also appear to be accurate. He turned the page, read the summary of what documents she claimed to possess. His expression didn't change, but something moved behind his eyes, something he wouldn't have let anyone see if they'd been watching his face closely enough to notice. Her father's file, he said. Pull it. Already done. Sungmin set a second folder on the counter. Older. The tab was labeled in Hangul, but the name inside was unmistakably English. Okafor C. Mapo District Development, 2017 to 2018. Tae-hyun didn't open it. He stared at it for a count of 5, then picked up his coffee again. Tell the building to expect her at 9, he said. Standard visitor protocol. No delays, no searches, no intimidation. She comes straight up. Sungmin's expression didn't shift, but there was a beat of surprise in it. Standard protocol. She's an attorney. She'll have copies of everything stored somewhere we can't touch. Anything we do to her before that meeting becomes ammunition. He took a sip of coffee. She's already thought of that. That's why she called at 3 a.m. instead of showing up unannounced. She's giving us time to be stupid. He stood, set the cup down. We're not going to be stupid. Mom. His office occupied the entire 53rd floor of the Black Phoenix Tower in Gangnam, and it was designed the way Tae-hyun had designed every room he'd ever occupied, to make the person sitting across from him feel small. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides, a desk of dark walnut the size of a dining table. No chairs on the visitor side. He made people stand by default, unless he specifically indicated otherwise. He had a chair brought in before she arrived. He told himself it was tactical. You didn't antagonize someone holding a live wire. His lawyer, a bespectacled man named Choi Dae-won, who had been with him for 11 years, arrived at 8 and spent 40 minutes trying to convince him to cancel. If she genuinely has what she's claiming, then we need to know exactly what she has, Tae-hyun said. If you acknowledge the documents exist by agreeing to see her, she already knows they exist. I knew they existed. This conversation was always going to happen eventually. He buttoned his jacket in the mirror beside the window. The question is how it happens. Choi Dae-won went quiet. In 11 years, he had learned there were certain arguments he would not win. At 9:08 a.m., his assistant's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Chairman, Ms. Okafor is in the elevator. Tae-hyun sat down behind his desk, laid both hands flat on the surface, looked at the door. It opened at 9:11. She was taller than he'd expected from the photograph. She walked like someone who had been told her whole life to make herself smaller and had decided at some point to take up precisely the amount of space she needed. She wore a charcoal gray suit, no jewelry except small gold studs in her ears, and she carried a single manila folder in her left hand. Her right hand was free. She took in the room in about 3 seconds, took in him in about 2. Then she sat down in the chair across from his desk, set the folder on her knee, and looked at him directly. You read my file, she said. Yes. Good. Then we can skip the part where you pretend not to know who I am. She set the folder on the edge of his desk. I'm going to leave that there. You can have your legal team authenticate everything in it, though I suspect you already know what's authentic. She folded her hands in her lap. I'm not here to negotiate a settlement. I'm not here to be bought off. And I'm not here to go to the press. Tae-hyun looked at the folder. He didn't touch it. Then what are you here for, he said. She held his gaze. Hers didn't waver. Not even slightly. Not even in the way most people's eyes moved when they were sitting across from him for the first time. He'd watched men with military training look away faster than she did. I'm here to give you a choice, she said. She talked for 22 minutes without interruption. And in those 22 minutes, Tae-hyun Kang, who had sat across from Yakuza lieutenants, Chinese triad negotiators, and a sitting member of the National Assembly who'd tried to have him killed, did not move. The evidence she possessed was substantial. He understood that within the first 3 minutes. Original land deeds that contradicted the recorded transfers used to justify the Mapo corridor development. Financial records showing money moving from a Kwansi-Jun subsidiary through 3 shell companies before landing in an account connected to a legal firm that had represented Taehyun's syndicate in 2017. A signed statement from a former city planning official who is now living in Canada and apparently willing to testify about a meeting he'd attended. A meeting where the phrase used to describe Chukwuemeka Okafor had been, according to the statement, a problem that needs to stop being a problem. Taehyun had not been at that meeting. He had, however, known about it afterward. He had known about all of it. "Here's what I'm not going to do," Amara said, her voice the same measured, almost airless tone she'd maintained from the moment she walked in. "I'm not going to hand this to a prosecutor tomorrow. That's not my timeline. My brother is in the middle of a treatment cycle that runs for another 11 months. My mother is here. I have a temporary registration with the Seoul bar. I need a year." "A year," Tae-hyun repeated. "To complete what I came here to do, which is care for my family." A pause. Not an emotional one, more like a calculated beat to let him process. "During that year, I have 4 conditions. I'm calling them levels. You meet all 4 in sequence, and at the end of 12 months, the evidence goes into a sealed archive rather than a prosecutor's filing cabinet. And if I don't meet them, then I file everything I have, plus whatever I accumulate during the year, and I let the Seoul Central Prosecutor's Office sort out the timeline." He leaned back 1 centimeter. "You're describing a probation system." "I'm describing accountability." She didn't blink. "Which you have apparently never been subject to in your adult life." There was a pause in the room. His lawyer, Choi Dae-won, shifted his weight in the corner. Sung-min, standing near the door, had his eyes moving between them. "Level 1, she continued, "effective immediately. Every communication between you and me passes through my legal representative, a lawyer named James Osei, who is flying in from New York this week. Every action your organization takes that could remotely connect to my family, Malik's treatment, our housing, my temporary practice registration, requires documented approval through an independent channel. You don't show up at the hospital. You don't contact my mother. You don't have anyone follow me." She tilted her head slightly. "And you don't touch a single document, witness, or piece of evidence related to my father's case. If anything in that chain of custody so much as shifts, if one witness gets a phone call they weren't expecting, the agreement ends immediately." He said nothing. "Your payments for my brother's treatment, I haven't offered to pay for anything." "Level 1 includes that offer," she said. "You're going to make it." The silence stretched. Taehyun looked at her for a long moment. "You're telling me what I'm going to offer. I'm telling you what you owe." She said it without heat. That was the thing about her. There was no heat in any of it, just the weight of something long decided. "Malik's treatment costs are being funded through a payment arrangement the hospital set up, which my mother cannot sustain past 4 months. You're going to establish an independent trust with a third-party administrator. The funds cover treatment costs for the full clinical trial period. You have no contact with the administrators, no oversight, no access. It goes in, it covers the costs, and you don't get to use it as leverage." Choi Dae-won made a sound in the corner. Not a word, just a sound. Taehyun didn't look at him. "Those are the terms of Level 1, Amara said. You have until 6 p.m. today to accept or decline." He leaned forward, slowly, rested one forearm on the desk. "And what exactly do I receive at the end of Level 1? Level 2? That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now." She stood, straightened her jacket. "You don't get to see the road ahead. That's part of it." She picked up the folder from his desk. He hadn't touched it. She tucked it back under her arm. "Before 6 p.m., she said, and walked out. He stood at the windows for a long time after she left. 53 floors below, the city moved in its ordinary way, taxis and delivery bikes and pedestrians who had no idea what had just happened in this room. Choi Dae-won spoke first. "She can't enforce any of this, legally. The evidence she has is circumstantial at best, and any competent defense could tie it up for years," Taehyun said. "Yes. So she knows that." He turned from the window. His face had the quality it sometimes got. Flat, unreadable, working through something that hadn't resolved yet. "She's not relying on the legal threat alone. She's relying on the fact that any prosecution, regardless of outcome, opens every door we've spent 2 decades welding shut. He picked up the folder she'd left. He realized only then that she had left a copy, not the original. Of course she had. Kwon Sejun will hear about this within the week, possibly within the day. If Kwon knows she exists and thinks I'm not handling it, he'll handle it himself. He opened the folder, looked at the first document. The handwriting on the original land deed was in Korean, but the notarization stamp was from a firm he recognized. And his version of handling it is not mine. He closed the folder. The thing about Amara Okafor was that she had walked in here with leverage she clearly understood, and she had made a demand that was, by any rational calculation, designed to humiliate him, to strip him of control, to make him wait for permission the way his own people waited for his. He should have been furious. He was not furious. He was something else, something he turned over carefully in the back of his mind as he stood there with his hand on the folder. She hadn't demanded money. She hadn't asked for power. She hadn't tried to build anything for herself out of what she was holding over him. She had asked for accountability, and she had asked for her brother's life. He thought about the meeting in 2018 that he hadn't attended, the phone call he'd received afterward. The voice on the other end, a man who worked for Kwon Sejun's development team, using the past tense for the first time about a problem that needed to stop being one. He'd asked no questions. That was the thing he'd never said out loud to anyone. He'd received the call and asked no questions and gone to sleep in a hotel in Busan and woken up the next morning to news reports about a construction site accident and told himself it had nothing to do with him. 7 years of telling himself it had nothing to do with him. At 5:47 p.m., he called Choi Dae-won. Tell her lawyer, what was the name? James Osei. Tell him we accept level 1. Oh. The independent trust was established within 72 hours. Tae-hyun used a financial administrator he'd never worked with before, a firm recommended by Amara's lawyer, not his own, which meant he had genuinely no visibility into the account once the funds transferred. He had signed over the ability to verify or adjust anything without going through James Osei first. In 20 years of running the Black Phoenix Syndicate, he had never signed anything he couldn't unsign. He didn't sleep well that night. He also didn't undo it. The first month was, by any objective measure, degrading. Every communication from his organization that crossed any line Amara had defined, which were more lines than he'd anticipated because she had drawn them precisely, had to pass through Osei's office. Twice in the first 2 weeks, Sung-min came to him with situations that would ordinarily have been handled in a single phone call and instead required documentation and formal notification. This takes 4 days, Sung-min said, holding up a request form the size of a pamphlet. For what used to take 4 minutes. Then do it in 4 days. Sung-min had been with him for 15 years. He gave nothing away, facially. But he looked at this form the way a man looks at something that has personally offended him. Tae-hyun didn't say anything else. He went back to his desk. He found himself thinking about her more than was useful, not in any way he could easily categorize, and not the calculating consideration you gave someone who is a threat, not the idle distraction of attraction, though he wasn't going to pretend she wasn't striking, in the way someone is striking when everything about them is pointed and exact. It was something else. He thought about what she'd said when she stood up to leave. You don't get to see the road ahead. That's part of it. Like she'd thought about this for a long time. Like the structure of it, the levels, the sequencing, the deliberate removal of his control, wasn't just legal strategy. It was something more personal than that. Not revenge. She'd been specific. She wasn't asking for revenge. But something in the architecture of what she'd built felt like the work of someone who understood, intuitively, what it meant to move through the world under someone else's power and wanted him to understand it too. He was 41 years old. He had built an empire on the back of the knowledge that control was the only thing that kept you alive. People who gave up control ended up in the Han River. He spent the second month waiting for something to crack. It didn't. He spent the third month doing something he hadn't done since he was a teenager, which was waiting for someone else's permission to act. It was, on its worst days, intolerable. On its best days, and there were a few, unexpectedly, it was something else entirely. On the days when a piece of business resolved itself without him engineering the resolution. When Sungmin's team handled something inside the new parameters and it worked. When he sat across from Osei in a conference room and walked through the protocol, and the lawyer, young, careful, a man who clearly trusted Tae-hyun approximately as far as he could throw the penthouse, gave him a formal nod that felt absurdly like something had been earned. He didn't say this to anyone. He had started watching the hospital from a distance, not physically. He wasn't stupid enough to violate the terms, but through available records, through what Osei's office communicated via formal updates. The trust was dispersing. The treatment cycle was on schedule. The boy, Malik, was, according to the latest medical report, responding. He didn't know what to do with the relief he felt reading that. The 4th month brought the first complication. Chairman Kwon Se-jun was 64 years old, a small, meticulous man who wore his money the way architecture wore load-bearing walls, invisibly, structurally, holding everything else up. He had built his development empire over 30 years, and he understood, better than most people alive, that real power left no fingerprints. He had not survived 3 decades of navigating Korean political and business culture by being discoverable. Tae-hyun knew, the moment his private line rang on a Tuesday evening in the 4th month, that Kwon had found out. "She's been very quiet," Kwon said without preamble. His voice was the voice of a man who had never once needed to raise it. "This attorney, I understand you've been accommodating her." "I'm handling it. I asked around about her." "The Okafor girl." A pause. "The kind that was a performance. Her father was a stubborn man. I always respected that in a way. It was just very inconvenient." Tae-hyun held the phone against his ear and said nothing. "Tae-hyun," Kwon said, "you understand what she's holding." "I do." "Then you understand that the timeline of my patients is considerably shorter than hers." Another pause. "I'm not asking for details. I'm telling you that what she has cannot reach the light. Whatever solution you're pursuing, it needs to arrive at that conclusion." The call ended. Tae-hyun put the phone down on his desk and sat with his hands flat on the surface. He knew what Kwon meant. He had always known the language. Whatever solution. It meant the solution didn't need to preserve her ability to breathe. He sat there for a long time. He thought about 2018, about the phone call in the hotel room in Busan, about asking no questions. He pulled up Osei's number on his phone. He did not call Kwon back. None. He requested a meeting with Amar directly, through proper channels, documented, routed through Osei, for the first time in the 4th month. She agreed to it. A neutral location, a glass-walled cafe in Hongdae at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday. She was there when he arrived, coffee already in front of her, reading something on her phone which she put away when she saw him. He sat down. He didn't order anything. "Kwon knows about you," he said. She didn't react the way most people would have. No visible alarm, no reaching for her phone, no physical shift. She took a slow breath through her nose, and her hands, which had been around her coffee cup, relaxed very deliberately onto the table. "How long have you known?" she said. "He called me 4 days ago." "And you're telling me now?" "I'm telling you through the appropriate channel." He kept his voice level. "This is a scheduled meeting. I'm informing you of a development that affects the terms of our agreement." "And what did he say?" "Nothing he'll ever be able to be quoted on." He met her eyes. He said the timeline of his patients is short. He used the word solution. She was quiet for a moment. He watched her process it. Not panic, not fear, but something very controlled working underneath the surface. "He'll try to move through an intermediary," she said. "He won't come at me directly." "No, he doesn't do direct," Tae-hyun said. "He'll try to disrupt the evidence chain first, reach the witnesses. If that doesn't work..." He stopped. "If that doesn't work," she said, "he reaches my family." He said nothing. She looked at him for a long moment. "You're telling me this because you want me to run." "I'm telling you this because the agreement we made operates on the assumption that the threat is only me. It isn't only me anymore. It was never only you." She picked up her coffee. Her hand was completely steady. "Kwon is why my father is dead. I knew he'd surface eventually. The question is whether you're going to help him." The question landed in the space between them and sat there. Tae-hyun looked at the table, at the grain of the wood surface, at his own hands, which were the hands of a man who had, over the course of his life, done considerable damage to the world. No, he said. She looked at him. Not like she believed him, not yet, but like she was measuring the distance between what he said and what she could prove. Then you understand, she said, that level 1 just got more complicated. Yes. And that the complications don't change the terms. He met her eyes. I know. She set her coffee cup down. Outside the cafe window, the street moved in its ordinary way. Students and couples and old men with grocery bags. The world that had no idea what was circling beneath it. Go back to your office, Chairman Kang, she said. Not unkindly, exactly. More like she was issuing instructions to someone who had improbably started to be somewhat useful. Don't communicate with Quan again. Not about me. Not about anything that touches this. He stood. One more thing, she said. He paused. My brother's next scan is on Friday, she said. The results matter a great deal. She looked out the window. Something moved in her face, not much, barely anything, but it was there. That's all. He left. He sat in the back of his car for a long time before telling the driver to go. He did not know, with certainty, why he was doing this. Why he had said no when Quan called. Why he sat across from her in a cafe and reported the threat instead of managing it quietly. Why, when he thought about Quan's word, solution, something in him went cold and hard in a way that had nothing to do with legal exposure. He'd done worse than this in 20 years. Far worse. He had never lost sleep over it. But the boy was 17 and had leukemia, and his scan was on Friday. And the woman had walked into his building with nothing but a folder and 7 years of absolute rage, and she had offered him, of all the things she could have offered, a way to account for it. He thought about asking no questions in a hotel room in Busan in 2018. He thought about the word solution. He pulled out his phone and called Sung Min. I need everything we have on Quan's current operations, not the old files, current, last 6 months. He stared out the window. And I need a separate secure line that doesn't go through our usual infrastructure, something even Quan's people can't see. A beat. What are we doing? Sung Min asked. Taehyun was quiet for a second. I don't entirely know yet, he said, but we're not doing what he's expecting. The car moved through the afternoon traffic of Seoul. The city pressed in on all sides, glass and concrete, and 1,000 things happening behind closed doors the way they always did, the way they always had. The Black Phoenix Syndicate had operated in the seams of this city for 2 decades. Hidden, untouchable, moving through the dark places between the lights. He thought about Amara Okafor walking into his building with a manila folder and sitting down across from him like she wasn't afraid of a single thing in that room. Maybe she was afraid. He suspected she was. She was just better at it than anyone he'd ever met. His phone buzzed. A message through Osei's office, routed through the formal channel, time-stamped and documented. Friday's scan appointment is confirmed. 10:15 a.m. Yonsei Severance. J. Osei. He read it, typed back nothing. Set the phone on the seat beside him. Outside, Seoul moved in its indifferent millions. And somewhere across the city, in a hospital room, a 17-year-old boy who didn't know any of this existed was sleeping through his 4th month of chemotherapy, breathing in and out with the stubborn persistence of the living. Tae-hyun closed his eyes. The call he didn't tell Amara about came that same night. Not from Quan, from one of Quan's people, a man named Director Lim, who managed the murkier operational ends of Quan's business, and who had been, in the early years, someone Tae Hyun had worked alongside. The relationship was old and professionally cordial and built entirely on mutual usefulness. The chairman is not patient by nature, Lim said. You know this. I know. The woman, the evidence. There's a simpler path. Tell him I'm handling it. He doesn't believe you're handling it. He believes you're letting it happen. A pause. He has people in place near the hospital. I wanted you to know that, as a professional courtesy. Taehyun's hand tightened on the phone. Tell him, he said carefully, that if anything happens to anyone connected to that woman or her family, the evidence she holds becomes the least of his problems. Silence. That's an interesting position, Lim said. Tell him. He ended the call, and immediately called Sung Min. "The hospital," he said. "I need discreet coverage. Not our people near the building. That violates the terms. But I need eyes on any external surveillance of the hospital grounds. Anything that looks like Kwan's people are positioning." "You're protecting her," Sung Min said. "Not an accusation, just a fact being named." "I'm protecting the terms of the agreement." A beat. "Right," Sung Min said. "Sung Min. Yeah, do it fast." He put the phone down and stood at the window of his penthouse and looked out at the lights of Seoul, the millions of lit windows of a city that had always rewarded the ruthless and buried the honest, and tried to understand what exactly he had stepped into. He had spent 20 years being the thing people needed protection from. He was not equipped in any obvious way for this direction, but Lim had said people in place near the hospital. And the boy's scan was Friday, and Amara Okafor had sat across from him in a cafe and told him, with complete stillness, that Friday's results mattered a great deal, which was the most human thing she had said to him since the night she called at 3:47 a.m., and he had walked out without saying anything useful in response. He was going to make sure nothing happened to that scan. He was going to make sure nothing happened to her. He didn't fully know why yet. But the folder was real, and the guilt was real, and somewhere in the 4 months since she'd walked into his office, something had shifted in the weight of what he was carrying. Not lighter, not yet, maybe not ever, but different. Oriented differently. Like a compass that had been pointing the wrong direction for so long that true north felt wrong until suddenly, viscerally, it didn't. It was just past midnight. In 9 hours and 15 minutes, a 17-year-old boy would go for a scan that might tell him whether he was going to live. Kang Tae-hyun, chairman of the Black Phoenix Syndicate, sat down in a chair by the window and waited for morning. And in the morning, it was going to get a great deal more complicated. Because what neither of them knew yet, what would not become clear until Osei's office received an unexpected document transfer 4 days after the scan from a source that shouldn't have had access to anything, was that the evidence Amara Okafor was holding was not the only copy of those records. Someone else had them. And that someone was not on her side. The document transfer came through Osei's office on a Tuesday, 4 days after Malik's scan, not via email, not via courier. A USB drive, mailed in a plain envelope with no return address, postmarked from a neighborhood in Mapo district, which was either a coincidence or someone's idea of a message. Osei called Amara at 7 a.m., and by 7:40 she was sitting at the small desk in their rented apartment in Mapo-gu, the drive plugged into her laptop, her mother moving quietly in the kitchen behind her, making something that smelled like a goosey soup, even though it was barely morning. The files were financial records. Not the same ones she had, different routing, different shell companies, 3 of them she'd never seen before, registered in Cyprus and the Isle of Man. But the destination accounts connected to the same development project, the same corridor, the same 2017 to 2018 timeline. Someone had been building a parallel case. She sat with that for a long moment. The apartment was small. Her mother had found it through a community connection, a Nigerian-Korean family who rented it, furnished at below market rate. And the walls were thin enough that she could hear the upstairs neighbor's television. Outside the window, the Mapo streets were starting to fill with morning foot traffic. A normal Tuesday in Seoul. She looked at the files for another 20 minutes. Then she closed the laptop and called Osei. "Whoever sent this," she said, "either wants to help us or wants us to think they do." "Which means we can't use it," Osei said. "Not without knowing the source. If it's planted, it compromises everything we have." She pressed 2 fingers against her temple. "Run the account numbers through every database we have access to. I want to know if any of these entities have appeared in any public filing anywhere in the last 10 years. And Kang?" She was quiet. "He should know," Osei said. "If this came from Kwan's side, I know." She stood up, moved to the window. Down on the street, a woman was arguing with a delivery driver about a parking spot, the universal language of early morning irritation. "Set up a meeting, today if possible, the cafe again. He'll ask questions we don't have answers to. Then he'll have to be comfortable with that," she said. "Welcome to my life for the last 7 years." He was already at the cafe when she arrived, which told her he'd been notified quickly and come fast, which told her something about the current state of his attention that she filed away without comment. She sat down, slid her phone across the table with a photograph of the envelope on the screen. He looked at it. His face did the thing it did, went very still, very flat, processing without showing the process. Mapo postmark, he said. Yes. Show me the accounts. She had printed 3 pages, nothing that constituted actual evidence, just enough for him to recognize patterns. She set them on the table face down and watched him turn them over. His jaw moved, just once. You recognize something, she said. One of these. He tapped the second page without pointing at anything specific. The Isle of Man entity. The naming convention. He set the pages down. It matches a structure I've seen before, not mine. Kwan's secondary infrastructure, the layer he uses for things he doesn't want in the same proximity as his primary accounts. So it came from Kwan's organization, or from someone inside it who wants to give you Kwan. She looked at him. That's a significant distinction. Yes. Who inside Kwan's organization would want to give him up? Tae-hyun leaned back. His hands were on the table, loosely, and she'd noticed over the months of dealing with him that his hands were often the most honest thing about him. His face could be controlled, his voice could be controlled, but his hands reflected the actual state of what was happening inside. Right now they were still but not relaxed, the stillness of something held deliberately in place. Director Lim, he said. Who is that? Kwan's operational head. He called me the night I warned you about the hospital, passed on Kwan's threat. He paused. He also told me Kwan had people positioned near Severance. He didn't have to tell me that. So he warned you. He called it a professional courtesy. And you think he sent this? I think it's possible. He picked up his coffee, which had gone cold. Drank it anyway. Lim is 60. He's been with Kwan since the beginning. He knows where every body is buried, literally and otherwise. If he's decided Kwan is a liability, then he's building an exit, she said, or building leverage for a negotiation. She looked at the pages on the table. With me. Or with a prosecutor's office. He set the cup down. Or with both. The cafe around them was mid-morning busy. The lunch crowd hadn't arrived yet, but the coffee crowd was thick. The kind of ambient noise that was useful for conversations you didn't want overheard. She'd chosen it for that reason. If Lim is moving independently of Kwan, she said, then Kwan doesn't know this exists. Not yet. Which means we have a window, a small one. He looked at her directly, and using it means deciding whether to trust a man who spent 30 years helping Kwan do everything he did. She held his gaze. You spent 20 years building a criminal empire. A beat. Yes, he said. I did. She picked up the printed pages, folded them, put them in her bag. Don't contact Lim. Don't acknowledge the envelope through any channel Kwan's people could monitor. She stood. I need to think. Amara. It was the first time he'd used her name, not Ms. Okafor, not the attorney, not the various indirect references that had characterized 4 months of formal communication. Just her name, said in a way that was neither casual nor performative, just direct. She stopped. The scan results, he said. Malik's scan. She looked at him. Her face did its own version of the flatness she'd identified in his, the controlled surface over whatever was actually moving underneath. Responding, she said. The cycle is working. He nodded once. Good. She left. Malik was sitting up in bed when she got to the hospital, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too large and watching a football match on his tablet with the focused intensity of someone who had decided that as long as he could watch football, he was going to be fine. He was thin, thinner than she remembered from New York, though he was eating better now that their mother was cooking regularly, and his head was shaved from the treatment, and he looked simultaneously like a small child, and like someone who had developed opinions about the world from the inside of a hospital room that most people twice his age hadn't reached. You have that face, he said, without looking up from the tablet. What face? The one where you're thinking about something you don't want to tell me. She sat in the chair beside his bed. I'm always thinking about something I don't want to tell you. That's called being your older sister. He paused the match, looked at her. He had their father's eyes, dark brown, direct, The kind of eyes that made it difficult to be less than honest. She had hated that about him when they were younger, when she was 15 and he was 3, and he looked at her with those eyes like he already knew everything she was trying to hide. "The Kong guy," Malik said. "Is he actually doing what he's supposed to be doing?" She paused. "What do you know about Kang Tae-hyun?" "Mum told me some of it, not all of it." He pulled his knees up under the blanket. "She said a man who owed us something was paying for the treatment. I Googled the name. Malik. He's like a crime boss. A real one." He said it without drama, which was somehow worse than if he'd said it dramatically. "He's the reason Dad died." The room went quiet except for the ambient hospital sounds, the distant beep of monitors, the muffled PA system, the ventilation hum. "It's more complicated than that," she said. "Is it?" She looked at her brother, at the IV line in his arm, at the hoodie that had been their father's university sweatshirt, washed so many times the lettering was barely legible. "He knew," she said. "He didn't order it, but he knew what was going to happen, and he said nothing." She kept her voice even. "And now he's in a position where accountability is possible, and I'm using it. Are you going to forgive him?" "No." "Not ever?" She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what I'm going to do in a year. Right now I'm trying to get you through this cycle and make sure the people responsible for Dad's death face actual consequences." She looked at him. "That's all the future I have." Malik looked at the paused football match on his tablet. A player caught mid-run, frozen between strides. "Dad would want you to be okay," he said. "Not just right, okay. I know. Those aren't always the same thing." She reached out and pressed her hand over his briefly. His fingers, cold from the room temperature, turned over and held hers for a moment. 17 years old and already saying things that should have taken decades. "Watch your match," she said. He unpaused it. She sat with him for another hour without saying much of anything, and it was the most peaceful she'd felt in months. The call from Osei came at 9 that night. "The Isle of Man account," he said. "I found it. Public filing 2021, a routine financial disclosure connected to a Quan subsidiary that went through a regulatory audit. It's a footnote, the kind of thing that wouldn't register unless you were looking for it." He paused. "The entity is real, and it connects to 3 other accounts in the filing. 2 of those 3 accounts show transfers that match dates in your father's case file, within days of the land deed transfers." She was sitting on the edge of her bed in the apartment, the city quiet outside, her mother already asleep. "That's independent corroboration," she said. "Of the new material, yes, which means whoever sent the drive wasn't fabricating. They gave us something that cross-references to public record." A pause. "This is real, Amara. Whatever it is, it's real." She pressed her free hand flat against her thigh. "Okay," she said. "There's something else." Osei's voice shifted, not alarmed, more like carefully measured. "I ran the postmark location, the specific post office in Mapo district. It's 4 blocks from the construction site where your father died." She didn't say anything for a moment. "Someone wanted us to notice that," she said. "Yes." She stood up, moved to the window. The night street below was nearly empty. A taxi. A couple walking close together. Nothing that looked like surveillance, though she'd been conscious of that possibility since the Quan conversation. "Whoever sent this," she said, "is telling us they know the whole story, not just the financials, the location, the timeline." Her reflection in the glass was dim, barely visible. "They were there, Osei. Whoever sent this was there." A long pause. Or they knew someone who was. She told Taehyun the next morning. Not through formal channels. She called Osei, had him relay the request for an immediate meeting, and by 11 they were in a different location this time, a pojangmacha in Mapo that Osei had cleared for privacy, a canvas-walled street stall that was empty at midday. She watched Taehyun's face when she told him what Osei had found, watched the Isle of Man connection land, watched something move behind his eyes when she mentioned the postmark location. "You know something," she said. He was quiet for 3 seconds too long. "Taehyun." The name, sharp. He looked at her. "In 2018, he said, after I was told, after I received the call in Busan." He stopped, started again. "There was someone else in Kwan's orbit who knew the full picture, not Lim, someone older, a man named Director O, who handled the site logistics for the Mapo project. He stared at the table surface. He retired in 2020. I don't know where he is now. Retired voluntarily. That was the word used. A pause. Quan doesn't let people who know too much retire, not without a reason. Then O had something on Quan. Has. He looked up. If he's still alive, he has it, and if he's been in Mapo, he sent the drive. She leaned forward. Tae Hyun, if O witnessed what happened to my father, he may have done more than witness it. The words landed between them. She felt the chill of it, the way it expanded the geometry of what she was dealing with, the shadow lengthening. How much more? She said. I don't know. He met her eyes. That's the truth. I don't know exactly what happened on that site. I knew the outcome. I didn't ask about the process. His jaw was tight, the muscles of it visible. I told you I chose silence. That's what silence meant. I didn't ask because I didn't want to know. She looked at him for a long moment. The canvas walls of the Pojangmacha shifted slightly in the wind outside. We need to find O, she said. Finding him means moving outside the terms of level 1. Then we'll talk about what level 1 needs to accommodate. He shook his head slightly. You built those terms to keep me contained. I built those terms to keep you accountable. She held his gaze. There's a difference. And right now being accountable means helping me find the man who might have been present when my father died. Because he's trying to surface, and if Quan figures out he's moving, O is dead, and so is whatever he knows. She kept her voice low and flat. So tell me, what does finding Director O look like? Taehyun looked at his hands, at the table, out through the canvas opening at the empty Mapo street. It means using people and methods, he said slowly, that exist outside any formal channel. Yes. If I do that, I'm operating outside what you can document and verify. Yes. That's a significant amount of trust to extend in month 5. She looked at him. Her hands were flat on the table between them. I know. A silence. Why? He said. She took a breath. Let it out. Because you told me about Kwan's call when you didn't have to. Because you had Sungmin put coverage around the hospital before Malik's scan. She paused. I know about that. Osei found the traces. She watched his face, a flicker of surprise, quickly controlled. You operated outside the terms, but in the direction of protecting my family instead of threatening them. She kept her eyes on his. That's not nothing. He was very still. I'm not forgiving you, she said. I want to be clear about that. I know. But I'm updating my assessment. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face, too complex to name, too old to be simple. Like something that had been compressed for a long time was being slowly, carefully allowed to take up fractionally more space. I'll find O, he said. Yet, he found him in 4 days. Director Oh Sang-pil, 67 years old, living in a rented room in a low-rise building 6 blocks from the Mapo construction site where Chukwuemeka Okafor had fallen in 2018. He had been there for 2 years. Sungmin's people located him through a pharmacy prescription. The man had a heart condition that required monthly medication, and the pharmacy records cross-referenced with a building registration. Tae-hyun went alone. He didn't tell Amara until after. O's room was small and clean and held the particular quality of a space organized by a man who had reduced his life to its essentials. A bed, a desk, a window. Photographs on the desk, a wife who had died, a daughter who had apparently stopped communicating with him, according to Sungmin's research. A man who had bought silence with his retirement and then lived inside it for 5 years. He opened the door and looked at Tae-hyun and was not surprised. I wondered if it would be you or one of Kwan's people, Oh said. I came alone. Oh looked past him into the hallway, looked back. Come in. They sat across from each other in the only 2 chairs in the room. Oh poured water, just water from a plastic bottle, and handed Tae-hyun a cup with the careful manners of an older man who had once operated in professional circles that required courtesy and had kept the habit. The envelope, Tae-hyun said. I sent it to the lawyer's office, Oh said. Not to you. I know. I wanted her to have it first. O's voice was measured, old, worn in the way of something used many times. I've wanted to send it for 5 years. I didn't know she was back in Seoul until I saw her photograph in a bar association notice. Temporary registration. He turned his water cup in his hands. Her father's eyes. Tae-hyun said nothing. I was at the site, Oh said. The morning it happened. He looked at the window. The Mapo street outside was visible. Ordinary, indifferent, the same street it had been for decades. It wasn't an accident. The words took up all the air in the room. I know, Tae-hyun said very quietly. But you don't know what I saw. Oh looked back at him. And neither does the prosecutor's file, because I was the only one there who wasn't Kwan's man. He set his cup down. I was there because the site manager had asked me to review the safety assessment, a routine visit. I arrived early. He stopped. His jaw worked. I saw two men. I saw what they did. I recognized one of them. He looked at Tae-hyun with eyes that had been carrying something for a long time. It wasn't an accident and it wasn't a fall. Tae-hyun's hands were completely still. The man I recognized, Oh said, is currently a senior official in Kwan's security division. The silence stretched. Outside, a car passed on the street. You've had this for 5 years, Tae-hyun said. I've had it, and I've been afraid of it. Oh met his eyes without apology. I have a daughter. She doesn't speak to me, but she's alive. I chose to stay alive long enough for something to change. He straightened slightly. The Okafor girl coming back was the change. Tae-hyun stood. The room felt smaller than when he'd walked in. Will you talk to her? That's why I sent the envelope. And a prosecutor. Oh was quiet for a moment. If there's a structure that keeps me alive long enough to testify. Tae-hyun picked up his phone, looked at O's face, the face of an old man who had made terrible choices and smaller cowardices and was sitting on the other side of them in a room above a pharmacy in Mapo, alive in the way you were alive when you'd been waiting to do one right thing before the end. I'll arrange it, he said. He walked out of the building and stood on the Mapo street, the same street, 4 blocks from where it happened. He called Amara. She answered on the second ring. He could hear the hospital and ambient noise behind her. She was with Malik. I found O, he said. He was there, Amara. He saw it. He can name the man who was there. He paused. Your father didn't fall. A long silence on the line. I know, she said. Her voice was completely flat, controlled in the way of something that had been controlled for a very long time. I've always known. The Mapo street was ordinary and terrible around him. He'll testify, Tae-hyun said, if we can protect him. Another silence, then, does Kwan know you found him? Not yet. Then we have hours, maybe less. Her voice shifted, sharpened into the register he recognized, the register where she was no longer just carrying the grief, but moving through it toward something actionable. Get O out of that building tonight. Don't use any of your regular infrastructure. Is there a location Kwan's network doesn't know about? Yes. Then go. A beat. And Tae-hyun, don't call me from this number again until O is somewhere safe. Use the secondary channel Ose set up. Understood. He hung up and looked at the building behind him. O was somewhere up there in his small, clean room with his water bottle and his photographs, the weight of 5 years of the thing he'd seen pressing down on a heart that was already compromised. He went back inside. And when he came back out 20 minutes later, O was with him. They were 3 blocks from Tae-hyun's car when Sungmin called. We have a problem, Sungmin said. The word problem in Sungmin's vocabulary had a specific register. It wasn't the register of something manageable. Kwan's people. 2 vehicles. There are 2 streets behind you and they're not being subtle about it. Tae-hyun looked at O beside him. The old man was breathing harder than the walk warranted, his heart condition visible in the high color of his cheeks. How did they know? Tae-hyun said. The pharmacy, Sungmin said. They were watching the prescription records too. We should have... How far out are you? 4 minutes. Tae-hyun looked at the street around them. Mapo district in the late afternoon, dense with pedestrian traffic, small shops, The kind of neighborhood that had a dozen directions to move in if you knew where to move. Listen to me, he said to O, quiet and direct. We walk. Not fast. Into the market on the left. You stay with me. Don't look back. O nodded. His eyes were steady. A man who had been afraid for 5 years apparently arrived at a place on the other side of it. They turned into the market. Behind them, 2 streets back, someone was moving. And across the city, in a hospital room in Yonsei Severance, Malik Okafor was watching football on his tablet, unaware that the geometry of what surrounded him was, in this moment, shifting into something none of them could yet see the shape of. Taehyun moved through the market crowd with O at his shoulder, and the certain knowledge that the next 4 minutes would determine whether the year he was building toward would have a foundation to stand on, or whether Kwon would arrive at the only ending he'd ever been willing to write for all of. They made it to the car. Barely. Sungmin pulled up in a gray sedan with no plates that Taehyun didn't recognize. A vehicle from a pool he'd never touched, registered to nobody. The kind of car that existed precisely for moments like this one. Oh Song-pil folded himself into the back seat with the stiff movements of a man whose body was protesting every decision his mind had made in the last hour. And Taehyun got in beside him, and Sungmin had them moving before the door was fully closed. The 2 vehicles, Taehyun said, still in the market area. Sungmin checked the mirrors without turning his head. They lost visual. We have maybe 10 minutes before they figure out the direction. Where are we going? Oh said. Not a complaint, just a man who needed operational information. Somewhere that doesn't exist on paper, Taehyun said. Oh nodded and looked out the window at Mapo District moving past him. The neighborhood where he'd lived for 2 years, in a room above a pharmacy, carrying what he'd seen. He didn't look like a man being rescued. He looked like a man who had finally done the thing he'd been unable to do for 5 years, and was now experiencing the full weight of what came after. Taehyun watched him for a moment, then looked at his phone. The secondary channel Ose had established was an encrypted messaging application, a separate number that routed through a server in Singapore. He sent 2 words to Amara. He's safe. Her response came in 40 seconds. Kwon? He typed. Knew where O was. Followed us out. We lost them. A pause longer than her usual response time. Then, they'll go to the building next. Evidence. He'd already thought of that. O's room. Whatever else the old man had kept up there. Documents, records, anything physical. They'd tear it apart. He typed, Is there anything in the room we need? O, who had apparently been reading over his shoulder, said, The photograph's on the desk. The one of my daughter. A pause. And the bottom drawer of the desk. Locked. Small key on my keychain. He held up the keychain. A worn leather fob with 3 keys. Everything I've kept for 5 years is in that drawer. Taehyun looked at Sungmin. I'll send someone, Sungmin said, before being asked. 10 minutes ahead of Kwon's people. If they're already... Then we lose the room. Sungmin's voice was flat. We don't lose the man. Taehyun relayed the drawer information to Amara via the secure channel. Added, Send Osi's people if yours are closer. Mapo, building 6 blocks from the site, 3rd floor, room 308. Then he put the phone down and watched Seoul move past the windows and tried to calculate what Kwon knowing about O changed. It changed everything. That was the honest answer. O as a hidden witness with 5 years of silence was an asset. O as a known quantity that Kwon was actively pursuing was a liability with a target on him, and the minute Kwon's people confirmed he'd made contact with Taehyun, Kwon would understand the geometry of what was forming against him. The window they'd had, hours, Amar had said, had just closed. The safe house was a 3rd-floor unit in a residential building in Eunpyeong-gu, registered to a holding company that had no traceable connection to any of Taehyun's known entities. He'd maintained it for 11 years and never used it once. It smelled like a place that had been cleaned and left empty. The particular neutral smell of rooms that had never been lived in. Oh sat at the kitchen table. Sungmin's man had reached the Mapo building first, by 4 minutes, he reported, which was the kind of margin that aged you, and retrieved the drawer contents in a bag that now sat on the table in front of O. The old man opened it with his small key and laid the contents out in the methodical way of someone who had organized this material many times in private. Photographs? Documents. A small voice recorder. Old, the handheld kind with a microcassette. Taehyun looked at the recorder. 2018, Oh said. I recorded the conversation I had with Kwon Sejun's site manager 4 days before the incident. He placed it on the table. He told me what was going to happen. He used the words permanent resolution. I recorded it because I didn't know what to do, and I thought if I had it, I had protection. He looked at the recorder. I've listened to it 3 times in 5 years. Each time I told myself the next week I would do something with it. Taehyun sat down across from him. Why didn't you? Oh looked up. His eyes were old and tired and entirely without self-pity, which was somehow harder to look at than if they'd held some. I had a wife who was dying. Then I had a daughter who was afraid of what I knew. Then I had a habit of surviving that was stronger than my conscience. He paused. Those are the reasons. They're not good ones. No, Taehyun said. They're not. Oh looked at him with something almost like dark humor. You're not in a position to judge. I'm not judging. I'm agreeing with you. A silence. The recording, Taehyun said. Is it clear enough to be used? The voice is identifiable. The site manager's name was Deputy Director Park Hyun-soo. He's still employed by Kwon's organization. Oh's finger rested on the recorder without pressing anything. He's the man I saw on the site the morning the Okafor man died. The kitchen was quiet. Outside the window, the Eunpyeong neighborhood went about its ordinary evening. Taehyun picked up his phone and called Amara. She arrived at the safe house at 8 p.m. with Ose, who carried a document bag and the expression of a man who was running on 3 hours of sleep and professional obligation. She came in, took in the room. Oh at the table, the materials laid out, Taehyun standing by the window, and sat down across from Oh without preamble. She looked at him for a moment. He looked back. You were there, she said. Yes. Tell me what you saw. Oh told her. She sat completely still through all of it. Her hands were in her lap, out of sight under the table edge, and Taehyun watched her face and saw the thing he'd seen once before, in the cafe, when he told her about Kwon's call, the controlled surface over something that was moving hard underneath. But this was different in degree. This was the difference between knowing your father was killed and hearing the specific mechanics of how. Oh was precise. He'd had 5 years to order the memory, and he delivered it in the flat, sequential way of a man giving testimony he'd rehearsed internally 1,000 times. 2 men. Early morning. Chukwe Meka Okafor had arrived at the site for a meeting that had been represented to him as a final mediation session about the land dispute. The meeting didn't happen. What happened instead was described in 4 sentences that O delivered without embellishment. When he finished, the room was completely silent. Amar's hands came up from her lap and rested on the table. Both of them, flat, pressing down on the surface like she needed to feel something solid. Park Hyun-soo, she said. Yes. Where is he now? Still with Kwon's security division, senior position. Oh paused. He's been promoted twice since 2018. Something moved across Amar's face. Not grief exactly, more like a gear catching on another gear, a mechanical thing. The body deciding to keep moving because stopping was not an option. She looked at Ose, the recorder. Ose picked it up carefully. I'll need to have it authenticated and transferred to a digital format. Chain of custody documented. He looked at O. We'll need a formal statement. Witnessed. Notarized. Tonight, Amar said. Amara, tonight, James, while everything is still in one place and Kwon doesn't know exactly what we have. She looked at O. Can you do that tonight? O straightened in his chair. I've been waiting 5 years to do it. What? They worked until past midnight. Ose recorded O's formal statement on 2 separate devices, walked him through the notarization process with the notary public he called in from a contact, a Korean-American attorney who asked no questions beyond what the job required. Taehyun sat against the wall and watched, and said nothing, and was useful precisely once, when Ose needed a second witness signature and looked around the room. You! Osei said, looking at Taehyun with the expression of a man making peace with a particular irony. Taehyun signed where indicated. It was, he reflected, the strangest document he'd ever put his name to. When Oh was settled into the safe house bedroom with Sung Min's man outside the door, Amara and Taehyun stood in the kitchen with the remaining materials between them. Osei was in the other room, securing the digital files. She looked exhausted, not physically collapsed. She wasn't built for collapse, or she'd trained herself out of it. But there was a worn quality to the line of her shoulders, the set of her jaw, the kind of tired that wasn't about hours of sleep. "You should sit down," he said. She looked at him. "I'm fine." "I know you're fine. I'm saying you should sit down anyway." She looked at the table for a moment. Then she pulled out a chair and sat. He sat across from her. The materials between them, the photographs, the document copies, the now digital recording, looked ordinary on a kitchen table, the way terrible things always looked ordinary when you reduce them to paper. "The recording changes the timeline," she said. "We can't wait out the full year." No. Kwon knows Oh is gone. He'll assume Oh is talking. He'll start moving to neutralize everything that can be used against him. Yes. Which means the witnesses in Canada. She pressed 2 fingers to her temple. The city planning official. If Kwon reaches him, I've already had Sungmin flag it. We can put informal protective surveillance. Informal surveillance won't hold if Kwon decides to move hard. She dropped her hand. We need to accelerate. Level 4 was supposed to come at the end of 12 months. We don't have 12 months. He looked at her. Level 4. The prosecutor's office. The testimony. The dismantling of everything he'd built. "I know," he said. Saying yes to that now in month 5 means, I know what it means. She looked at him directly. Your entire network, your assets, everything that protects you and every person who works for you, it all surfaces. Yes. People inside your organization will view it as a betrayal. Some of them. He kept his voice even. Some of them will understand. And Kwon will retaliate before the prosecutors can move. The window between you going in and the charges sticking is where he'll come at everything. I know. At Malik. At my mother. Her voice didn't waver, but the words themselves had weight. At me. I know, he said. That's why we do it right. Not fast. Right. She looked at him for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet. The city outside the window was full of its own ordinary darkness. You're not afraid, she said. Not quite a question. He considered it honestly. I'm afraid of getting it wrong, he said, not of what it costs. She held his gaze for 3 seconds, 4, 5. Then she looked down at the table, at the photographs. One of them was O's daughter, a young woman in a school uniform, smiling. Another was a photograph she'd placed on the table herself from her bag. He recognized it without being told. A Nigerian-Korean man in his 40s, a broad face, dark eyes, standing in front of a building he didn't recognize with his arm around a teenage girl. The girl was Amara, maybe 15, smiling in a way she hadn't smiled since. He looked at it and didn't say anything. He was stubborn, she said. That was his worst quality, and also the best one. He wouldn't be moved, not by money, not by lawyers, not by men who showed up to meetings trying to look like they could make his life difficult. She didn't look up from the photograph. He called me the week before. He said he thought they were going to try something different. He said he wasn't scared, but his voice was. A pause. I was 18. I told him he should just sell the land and come home and be safe. She stopped. He didn't try to fill the silence. He'd learned that about her over months. She didn't want comfort. She wanted the space to say the true thing without someone rushing to make it easier. He said the land wasn't the point, she continued. He said when someone decides to take something from you, you don't fix it by giving it to them. You fix it by making them unable to take it. She finally looked up. He was right. I've spent 7 years learning that he was right. Yes, Taehyun said. You should have spoken, she said. Quiet. Direct. Not an accusation anymore, just the fact named. Yes, he would be alive. Yes. She held his eyes. I'm not forgiving you for that. I want you to understand that clearly. Bringing Quan down doesn't balance that. Oh, testifying doesn't balance it. Nothing balances it. I know. But you're going to help me make it right anyway. Yes. She nodded once, looked back down at the photograph. Then we need a plan that covers the gap between your testimony and the charges landing. Every vulnerability. Malik, my mother, oh, the Canadian witness. She straightened. The exhaustion was still there, but something under it had sharpened. Start from the beginning. Walk me through every person Quan can reach in that window and how we close each exposure. They worked until 3 in the morning. The call came at 6 a.m. Taehyun's personal line, not the secure channel, not the business line. His personal number, which had perhaps 40 people in the world who knew it. Choi Dae-won, his lawyer of 11 years. He answered. I need to tell you something, Choi said. His voice had a quality Taehyun had never heard in it before. Strained, pressurized, like a man speaking through something narrow. And I need you to hear it before you react. The quality of it put Taehyun's body on alert before his mind caught up. He sat up. Talk. Quan called me last night, Choi said. 2 hours after you left the Mapo building with O. A long pause. Taehyun's hand tightened on the phone. He knew I was your lawyer. He knew. He knew about the trust. The independent trust for the Okafor boys' treatment. Choi's voice was careful in the way of someone walking on something that could give way. He told me the terms you'd agreed to, the levels. He knew specific language from the level 1 agreement. The room went cold. Dae-won, Taehyun said, very quietly. He said he wanted me to convey a message. Choi's voice had a crack in it now, small, but audible. He said he's had access to the agreement structure since the 2nd week. He said someone gave him the documentation. Someone, Taehyun said. He didn't name them. He didn't need to. A pause. Taehyun, the level 1 terms, the specific protocols, those were only in 3 people's hands. Mine, Ose's, and yours. Taehyun stood up from the chair. He moved to the window. The Eunpyeong neighborhood was gray in the early morning light, ordinary and indifferent. You, he said. Choi stopped, started again. The crack in his voice widened. He has my son, Taehyun, my son Jae-won. He's been at university in Busan. Kwan's people picked him up 2 days ago. A sound on the line. A man trying not to make the sounds he was making. He said, as long as I cooperated, Jae-won was a guest. As long as I kept cooperating. How long? Taehyun said. His voice was very quiet. Since the 2nd week, Choi said again. Everything, Taehyun said. Everything that went through your office. Yes. The terms, the timelines, the trust documentation, the witness contacts. A silence that was its own answer. Oh, Taehyun said. Did Quan know where O was because of you? The pharmacy search. I had a contact do the same records check you did. I was trying to find O before you did, to warn Quan to... The voice broke completely for a moment. Chaewon is 22. He has nothing to do with any of this. Taehyun hung up. He stood at the window for 30 seconds. The cold had moved from the room into his chest, spreading outward in the specific way of betrayal. Not hot, not explosive, cold, the way ice was cold, the kind that numbed before it hurt. 11 years. He walked back to the kitchen where Amara was asleep in the chair, her head resting on her folded arms on the table, the photographs still spread out in front of her. He looked at her for a moment, at the photograph of her father. Then he put his hand on her shoulder. Her head came up immediately, alert in the way of someone who'd trained themselves not to sleep deeply. She saw his face, and whatever she saw in it brought her the rest of the way awake in a single second. What happened? She said. My lawyer, he said. Choi Dae-won. He's been feeding everything to Kwon since the 2nd week of our agreement. She stared at him. The level 1 terms, the trust structure, the witness contacts, all of it. He kept his voice flat because that was the only way to keep it functional. Kwon has his son. He's been using the son as leverage. She stood up, her chair scraped back. The Canadian witness. Exposed. Oh. Kwon finding was also Choi. She turned away from him, put both hands on the edge of the counter. Her back was to him, her shoulders a rigid line. He watched her process it. The full scope, the 7 months of careful construction, the protocols and levels and documented procedures, all of it transmitted in real time to the man they were building against. "The recording," she said to the counter. "O's formal statement. Does Kwon know we have it?" "Choi didn't know about last night. He was out of the loop from the moment I stopped using the main channel." He paused. "We have hours before Kwon realizes the recording exists." She turned around. Her face was controlled in the way of something very tightly held, the way a wire was controlled by the tension running through it. "Hours," she said. "Yes." "Then Choi's access ends now. Every channel he had goes dark in the next 20 minutes. She reached for her phone. "I'm calling Ose. Amara." He said her name the way he had in the cafe. Direct, not performative. "Kwon has a lawyer's son in custody. That changes the legal exposure. If we move against Kwon now, he uses the boy as... I know what he uses him as." Her jaw was tight. "That's why we get the boy out first." He looked at her. "Busan," she said. "Haewon Choi. University student. Kwon's people have him." She met his eyes. "You know people in Busan?" "Yes." "People who can move faster than Kwon's team if they know where to look." "Yes." "Then that's the next step." She was already typing on her phone. "We pull the boy out, we cut Choi's access, and then we go straight to the prosecutors, not at the end of 12 months. Now, today. Because Kwon just used every advantage he's had for 7 months to position himself for a single move, and that move is coming before he realizes we know." She stopped typing, looked at him. "If we hesitate, he doesn't just destroy the evidence. He destroys the witnesses. He destroys O. He destroys the Canadian. He destroys..." She stopped. Something shifted in her face. Not fear. Something adjacent to it. Something that was fear processed through a woman who had decided years ago not to let it stop her, but who still, under everything, felt it. "Malik," she said. The word landed in the room. "He's at the hospital," Taehyun said. "Sung Min already has..." "Pull him out of the hospital," she said. Right now, tonight." Her voice had changed, stripped of everything except what was essential. "I don't care what it does to the treatment schedule. I need him somewhere Kwon's people cannot reach in the next 48 hours. She swallowed. "That's the only thing I'm asking. Everything else, the prosecutors, the testimony, level 4, I'll do all of it. I'll tear this whole thing down with you. But I need my brother safe first." He was already calling Sung Min. She stood in the kitchen of a safe house in Unpyeong-gu with her father's photograph on the table in front of her and listened to Tae-hyun give quiet, precise instructions into the phone. She looked at the photograph, at the face she'd been carrying for 7 years, at the eyes that were also her brother's eyes. She had built the perfect structure. The levels, the protocols, the documented accountability. She had designed it to be airtight. She had given nothing to chance, and for 7 months, every careful detail had been walking directly into Kwon Se-jun's hands. She pressed her palm flat against the table surface, pressed hard enough that the edge bit into the heel of her hand. Held it there. The small, sharp pressure of something real and physical was the only thing she trusted right now to keep the rest of her. She pulled her hand off the table. The edge had left a red line across the heel of her palm. She looked at it for 1 second, then closed her hand into a fist and looked at Tae-hyun, who had just ended the call with Sung Min. "Malik," she said. "Sung Min's team is at the hospital now. They'll move him within the hour." He pocketed the phone. His face was the flat operational version, all the working parts running underneath without surfacing. "Your mother." "I'll call her. She won't understand." "She doesn't need to understand. She needs to move." Amara was already dialing. Her mother answered on the 3rd ring, groggy, the small sounds of the Mapo apartment behind her, and Amara spoke in Igbo, low, fast, the language of family emergencies, the one she defaulted to when English felt too exposed. Her mother's voice shifted from confused to alert in the space of 30 seconds. No argument. No questions beyond the one that mattered. Where? Amara gave her the address of a second location Osei had identified 3 weeks ago for contingencies. a service department in Yongsan managed by a Korean-Nigerian community organization. Clean, anonymous, accessible. She hung up. Osei appeared in the kitchen doorway, document bag over his shoulder, the recorder and statement copies secured inside. He looked at both of them and read the room in one pass. How bad, he said. Choi fed everything to Kwon for 7 months, Amara said. We assume Kwon knows our full timeline, our witness list, and the trust structure. He doesn't know about last night. He doesn't know about O's recording. She picked up her bag. We have a window that closes the moment Kwon's people report that O is gone and his room is empty, which may have already happened. Osei pressed his mouth flat. The Canadian witness. Call him, now. Don't explain. Tell him to move locations and wait for further contact. She looked at Tae-hyun. Busan. I have 2 people I trust in Busan who have no connection to my main organization. They're not on any list Choi would have accessed. He pulled his jacket on. They can reach Jaewon Choi if we have a location. Then we need a location. Choi will give us one. She looked at him. You're going to call him back? Yes. He betrayed you for 7 months. His son is 22 years old and did nothing. Taehyun's voice was even. Kwon took the son to control the father. That's a method I understand completely. A pause, brief and specific, that carried its own weight. I've used it. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Call him, she said. Tet. Choi answered immediately, like he'd been holding the phone since Taehyun hung up 40 minutes ago. The boy, Taehyun said. Where? A warehouse facility in Saha district. Choi's voice was wrecked, not crying, past that, the hollow sound of a man who had burned through every reserve. Near the port. I have an address. Kwon's man told me, send it to this number. He gave Choi the clean number. Then you're going to do one more thing. Tae-hyun, you're going to call Kwon's contact, whoever you report to, and you're going to tell them that last night was uneventful. That O was relocated but his materials were destroyed, that I have no new evidence. A pause. Can you do that? A long silence. If he finds out, he's going to find out everything eventually. The question is whether you buy us 12 hours first. His voice wasn't cruel. It wasn't warm either. It was the voice of a man making a precise calculation. 12 hours, Daewon, for your son. The address came through in 40 seconds. Tae-hyun forwarded it to the Busan contact, a woman named Ms. Han, who had done freelance security work for him 3 times over the years, careful and competent, and entirely outside Choi's knowledge, with 2 lines of instruction and the words tonight, quiet, no trail. Ms. Han replied, understood. 4 hours. He showed Amara the exchange. She read it and nodded once. 4 hours, she said. Then we move. They used the 4 hours. Osei worked the phone in the back room, coordinating with his firm's partners in New York to prepare emergency filing documents, the kind of package that could be transmitted to a prosecutor's office with authentication on short notice. Amara sat at the kitchen table and rebuilt the evidence architecture from scratch on paper, mapping every element they had that Kwon didn't know about. O's recorder, O's formal statement, the Cyprus and Isle of Man financial documents, the cross-referenced public filing, and the new piece, the eyewitness account naming Park Hyun-soo, currently senior security official in Kwon's organization, as the man present at the site in 2018. Tae-hyun sat across from her and answered every question she asked. She asked many. She was systematic in a way that was almost mechanical, working through the evidence map the way a surgeon worked, looking for the gaps, the places where a defense attorney could insert doubt. When she found one, she named it plainly, and they worked around it. When the evidence held, she moved on without comment. At one point, she stopped and looked at him across the table. The meeting in 2017, she said, the one where your legal counsel met with Kwon's development company. 3 weeks before my father died. She held a pen but wasn't writing. Choi was your legal counsel. A beat. Yes, he said. He was in that meeting. Yes. So Kwon has had access to Choi for not 7 months. No. He kept his eyes on hers. Much longer. Kwon helped build my organization in the early years. He was a source of capital and political cover when I needed both. Choi came to me through Kwon's recommendation. He paused. I didn't know what that meant until tonight. She looked at him. The pen was still in her hand, not moving. You built your empire on his foundation, she said. Yes. And then he used your father's land for his development project, and your people helped clear the obstacle. Yes. And your lawyer was his man the entire time. Apparently. His jaw was tight. Yes. She looked at the paper in front of her for a moment. Then she picked up the pen and kept writing. He watched her. Why aren't you saying it? He said. She didn't look up. Saying what? That the whole thing was rotten from the beginning. That there was never a version of my organization that wasn't connected to what happened to your father. She kept writing for 3 more seconds. Then she set the pen down. I know that, she said. I've known it since before I got on the plane. She met his eyes. That's why level 4 was always the end. Not a negotiation point. Not leverage. The actual end. She held his gaze. You understood that when you agreed. Yes. And you still agreed. Yes. She picked the pen back up. Then we don't need to have this conversation. Oh, Ms. Han's message came through at 4:47 a.m. Package secured. Undamaged. Moving to clean location. Await your instruction for handoff. Tae-hyun read it and felt something release in his chest that he hadn't known was locked. He passed the phone to Amara. She read it, set the phone down, and pressed both hands flat on the table again. Not the anguished pressure of hours ago, something else. The pressure of something that had held. Now, she said. Now, he said. Osei appeared in the doorway. He'd heard. The prosecutor's office opens at 9. I have a contact. A deputy chief prosecutor named Han Ji-young. She's been building a financial crimes case against Kwan's organization for 2 years without enough to move. What we have... He paused. What we have is enough. Can she move fast enough? Amara said. Once we walk in, Kwan has people inside that office. Not necessarily prosecutors, but administrative? Yes. Osei had clearly thought about this. We bypass the standard intake. I call Han Ji-young directly, private cell, before we arrive. We come in through the building's secondary entrance with everything already authenticated and packaged. She signs the emergency preservation order within the hour, which freezes Kwan's ability to destroy records legally. He looked at Tae-hyun. You'll need to be physically present. Your testimony triggers the emergency status. I know. Once you walk into that building, everything changes. I know. Your organization, your assets, the people who... I know, Tae-hyun said. Make the call. The light was starting when they left the safe house. Not sunrise yet. The gray before it, Seoul resolving itself out of darkness in the specific way of cities that never fully went dark to begin with. Tae-hyun's car was a different vehicle again, arranged by Sung-min, and Sung-min himself was driving with one other man in the front. Amara sat in the back with Tae-hyun. Osei followed in a separate car with Oh, who had been awake when they knocked on the bedroom door, sitting on the edge of the bed fully dressed, like a man who had known this morning was coming for 5 years and had decided not to waste it sleeping. They were 4 minutes from the prosecutor's office when Sung-min's phone went off. He answered, listened for 8 seconds, and said, Sir. Tae-hyun looked at the back of Sung-min's head. Kwan's vehicles, Sung-min said. 3 of them. They picked us up from the safe house. They've been running parallel 2 streets over. Amara looked out the window. The street around them was early morning sparse, some delivery traffic, a few taxis, the city not yet at full density. How long? Tae-hyun said. Since we left. They're not moving to intercept, Amara said. Not a question. She was watching the traffic pattern, reading it. Not yet, Sung-min said. They're waiting for something. For us to stop somewhere vulnerable, Tae-hyun said. A traffic light. An intersection. Or they're waiting to see where we're going, Amara said. If they didn't know about the prosecutors, they know now. Tae-hyun pulled out the secure phone, typed fast. 3 vehicles tracking us. Hold position at secondary entrance. We need 30 seconds of clear approach. He sent it to a number Sung-min had established 30 minutes ago. A coordination channel for the 2 additional men Sung-min had positioned near the prosecutor's building. The reply came in 15 seconds. Understood. Flagging now. How far? Tae-hyun said. 2 minutes. Amara had her bag on her lap, both hands on it. The evidence package, the authenticated documents, the digital recording file, O's statement, the financial cross-references, was inside it. She'd been holding it since they left the safe house with the particular grip of someone who understood exactly what was inside and what happened to everything if it didn't reach the next location. "If they move before we reach the entrance," she said. "They won't reach the vehicle," Sungmin said. "That's not what I'm asking." Sungmin was quiet for a beat. "The documents are authenticated. Copies are already with Osei's firm in New York. The recording is on 3 separate drives in 3 separate locations." He glanced in the rear view. "Even if something happens to the physical package, the case exists." She nodded once. Taehyun looked at her. Her face was forward, watching the street ahead, and in the gray pre-dawn light she looked, not afraid. He kept coming back to that. She was never simply afraid. But he could see the thing underneath the control now more clearly than he'd been able to in the months of formal meetings and careful protocol. The thing underneath was grief that had been running so long it had converted itself entirely into motion, into doing, into the next step and the step after that, because stopping meant feeling the full weight of what had been lost. And she had decided years ago that she would feel it when it was done and not before. He thought about her father's eyes in the photograph, the eyes that were Malik's eyes. "Hey," he said. She looked at him. "After this," he said, "when it's done, whatever comes after, you don't carry this alone anymore." She looked at him for a moment. Something moved in her face. Not soft, not yielding, more like a shift in the quality of the control, a fraction of an inch in some direction he didn't have a name for. "Don't make promises in moving vehicles," she said. Noted. Sungmin said, 30 seconds? The prosecutor's building appeared ahead, a concrete and glass structure in Seoul, the kind of institutional architecture designed to communicate permanence and authority. The secondary entrance was on the east side, a narrower approach between 2 buildings. Sungmin turned toward it. In the rear-view mirror, Taehyun saw one of Kwan's vehicles accelerate. "Sungmin!" "I see it." The second vehicle appeared from a side street. It had repositioned while they were watching the first. Taehyun's jaw tightened. 2 vectors. They'd split up in the last minute, coordinated, reading the destination and moving to cut the approach. "The 2 men at the entrance," Taehyun said. "They're flagging now." 20 seconds. The first Kwan vehicle was 30 meters back and closing. The second was coming from the left, trying to cut across to the secondary entrance lane. Sungmin accelerated, not fast enough to draw attention, but definitively, the car surging forward with the specific authority of a driver who knew exactly what he was doing. The Kwan vehicle from the left clipped the corner of a parked delivery truck trying to cut across. The impact was sharp and metallic and brief. The vehicle kept moving, but it had lost its angle. 10 seconds. The secondary entrance appeared on their right. 2 men were standing in the approach. Sungmin's people, positioned with their bodies physically in the lane behind them, blocking the pursuit vehicles from following. Sungmin stopped the car. "Go," he said. Amara was out first, bag against her chest, moving. Taehyun was a step behind her. He heard the first pursuit vehicle brake hard behind them. Too close. The sound of tires on cold asphalt. And then Sungmin's men were in the gap, and the entrance door was opening from the inside, and there was a woman in a prosecutor's office jacket holding it open with the expression of someone who had been briefed and was operating on about 30 minutes of emergency preparation. They were inside before Taehyun had fully processed the last 20 seconds. The door sealed behind them. Deputy Chief Prosecutor Han Ji-young was 44, precise, and had the manner of someone who had spent 2 years building a case she couldn't close and was now standing in her own secondary entrance corridor at 5:58 a.m., looking at the people who might have just handed her the key to it. She looked at the bag Amara was carrying, looked at Taehyun, looked at Osei, who had come through a separate entrance with O 30 seconds later. "Chairman Kang," she said. Not warmly, not coldly, professionally, the way you said the name of something significant and complicated. "Prosecutor Han," he said. "I've been building a case against Kwon Sejun's organization for 26 months, she said. "I have financial irregularities, 2 unreliable witnesses, and a prosecutor general who has asked me twice to redirect my resources." She looked at him. Tell me you've brought me something I can use. We've brought you a witness who was present at the site where Chukwuemeka Okafor died in 2018, Amara said, before Tae-hyun could answer. A contemporaneous audio recording of a conversation identifying the man responsible. Financial records cross-referenced to public filings connecting Kwon's secondary infrastructure to the land fraud. And she looked at Tae-hyun, a witness who can testify to Kwon's role from the inside. Han looked at Tae-hyun. You understand, she said carefully, that your own exposure in this testimony is significant. Yes, he said. Criminal conspiracy, fraud, potential accessory liability in the Okafor death depending on what the evidence shows about your level of knowledge. Yes. You're willing to testify to all of it, voluntarily. Yes. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she looked at Amara. I'm going to need 2 hours with all of this material before I can authorize any protective orders. In that 2 hours, Kwon's people cannot know you're in this building. His vehicles are outside, Amara said. My building has a particular relationship with external interference, Han said, with a flatness that suggested this was not the first time. They won't come through that door. She straightened. Come with me. They followed her through a corridor that smelled like paper and recycled air and the specific atmosphere of institutional buildings that ran through the night. O walked slowly beside Osei, his breathing audible, the exertion of the morning visible in the high color of his cheeks and the deliberate placement of each step. Tae-hyun watched him and thought about a man sitting in a room above a pharmacy for 2 years, waiting. Han's conference room was large enough for all of them. She closed the door, pulled the blinds on the internal windows, and sat down at the head of the table. Start from the beginning, she said. I want everything. Amara set the bag on the table, unzipped it, began laying out documents in the precise order she'd organized them at 3 a.m. in the safe house kitchen. The sequence that built the case from foundation to apex, each element supporting the next. The architecture of 7 years of controlled fury assembled into something a prosecutor could use. Tae-hyun sat down. He looked at the table, at the documents, at the recorder, which Osei set in the center of the table with a small digital playback device. Han Ji-young looked at all of it. Play the recording, she said. Osei pressed play. The voice that came out of the small speaker was the voice of a man giving operational instructions in the comfortable tone of someone who had given similar instructions many times. Deputy Director Park Hyun-soo, 7 years younger, standing in the Mapo district with Oh Sang-pil 4 days before a Nigerian-Korean businessman arrived at a construction site for a meeting that was never going to be a meeting. Permanent resolution, the voice said from the recorder, in the clean air of a prosecutor's conference room at 6 in the morning. The chairman wants it clean and it wants it final. The man doesn't walk away from the site. Han Ji-young's face didn't change, but her pen, which had been moving across her notepad, stopped. The recording continued for another 90 seconds. When it ended, the room was very quiet. Han looked at O. You'll testify to the chain of custody of this recording. Yes, O said, and to what you witnessed on the site. Yes. She looked at Tae-hyun. And you'll testify to your knowledge of Kwon's involvement in the land fraud and in the circumstances leading to Okafor's death. Yes. Everything. Everything, he said. She clicked her pen, looked at Amara. Ms. Okafor, she said, I'm going to authorize the emergency preservation order. That freezes Kwon's ability to move assets or destroy records for 72 hours. She paused. In those 72 hours, I'm going to need all of your witnesses in formal protective custody, including, she looked at Tae-hyun, you. He nodded. Once you're in protective custody, you're mine, she said. You understand that? Yes. The cooperation agreement will cover your own testimony. It won't insulate you from the exposure. You'll face charges. The cooperation buys you a sentencing recommendation, not immunity. I know. She held his gaze one more moment. Then she looked at Amara. Is there anything else I need to know before I make this call? Amara looked at the documents on the table. At O's photograph, which had somehow ended up at the edge of the spread. The daughter in the school uniform, smiling. At the recorder, sitting in the center of everything. My brother is 17, she said. He's in the middle of a leukemia treatment cycle. Whatever protection you can extend to him and my mother. I'll make that call in the next 5 minutes. Han said. Before anything else. She stood. Wait here? She left the conference room. The door closed. The room held all of them. Amara, Taehyun, Osei, Oh. In the particular silence of a moment between the last thing and the next one. The documents were on the table. The recorder was on the table. Outside, through the closed blinds, the Seoul morning was arriving in earnest. The city filling up with its ordinary millions who had no idea that in a conference room in the Seoul Central Prosecutor's office, the architecture of something that had stood for 7 years was about to be taken apart, brick by brick. Taehyun looked at Amara. She was looking at the recorder. He thought about the hotel room in Busan, the call he'd received, the questions he hadn't asked, the morning after, and the news reports, and the decision to carry it quietly and keep moving. 20 years of moving. Hey, she said. He looked at her. She met his eyes. Whatever happens in the next 72 hours, she paused. You did this right. He held her gaze. I did it late, he said. Yes, she said, but you did it. The door opened. Han Ji-young walked back in with her phone still in her hand and 2 other prosecutors behind her, both carrying their own notepads, both awake in the way of people called in urgently who had arrived at the sharpened, focused place on the other side of surprised. Protective custody for the Okafor family is in motion, Han said. She sat back down, looked at the table, looked at all of it. Then she looked directly at Tae-hyun Kang and said, Chairman, let's start with 2017. He took a breath, opened his mouth, and began to take apart the empire he talked for 6 hours. Not continuously. Han Ji-young stopped him periodically to clarify, to redirect, to have Osei authenticate a document or have O confirm a detail. But Taehyun talked for 6 hours in a way he had never talked in his adult life, which was completely, without the managed silences, without the calculated omissions that had characterized every conversation he'd had with prosecutors, lawyers, rivals, and allies for 2 decades. He said the things he knew, and he said the things he'd suspected, and he said the things he had chosen not to know, which were in some ways the most important category of all. Han Ji-young wrote without stopping. Her 2 prosecutors wrote without stopping. Amara sat at the far end of the table with a cup of coffee that went cold and didn't touch it, and listened to every word with her eyes on the middle distance, the way you listened to something you needed to absorb entirely and couldn't risk filtering through reaction. At 7:40 a.m., Han authorized the emergency preservation order. At 8:15, the order reached Kwon Sejun's primary financial institution. At 8:22, someone inside that institution made a phone call they shouldn't have made. At 8:31, Kwon Sejun's personal lawyer called Han Ji-young's office and was told the prosecutor was unavailable. At 8:47, Kwon Sejun's personal lawyer called again and was told the same thing by a different person, which told Kwon's lawyer everything he needed to know about what was happening inside that building. Sungmin relayed all of this via the secure channel in real time. He was still outside, managing the situation on the street with the particular competence of a man who had spent 15 years being competent in situations most people would have abandoned. Kwon's vehicles had not moved. They were waiting in the way of people who understood that the next move was not theirs to make. At 9:15, Han Ji-young looked at Tae-hyun across the table. Park Hyun-soo, she said. Current location. Kwon's primary security office, Gangnam. He paused. He'll have been notified by now that something is moving. He won't run. He'll go to Kwon. Then we move on him now, she said, and picked up her phone. But they took Park Hyun-soo at 10:08 a.m. outside the elevator bank of Kwon Sejun's Gangnam office building, where he had apparently arrived to report in person to his employer. Han's team, 6 prosecutors, investigators in plain clothes, moved with the efficiency of people who had been waiting 2 years for a morning exactly like this one. Park Hyun-soo was 53 years old and had the build of a man who had spent decades in physical occupations and the eyes of someone who had never once expected to be standing in an elevator lobby with investigators on both sides of him. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He looked at the warrant one of the investigators held up, and his face went through something. Not fear exactly, more like the specific expression of a man watching a long-running calculation finally reach its sum. Amara heard about it through Osei's phone at 10:22. sitting in the conference room with the remnants of the morning's work still spread across the table. She put Osei's phone down and sat for a moment with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the recorder, which was still in the center of the table. The man doesn't walk away from the sight. She picked up the recorder, held it. It was lighter than it should have been for something that had weighed this much for 5 years. She set it back down. O was in the corner of the room, asleep in his chair. Genuinely asleep. The heavy sleep of a man who had set something down that he'd been carrying so long his body didn't immediately know what to do with the absence of the weight. His breathing was slow and audible. His hands were loose in his lap. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the door. Taehyun had been taken to a separate room 40 minutes ago, which was standard procedure once formal cooperation status was established. The witness and the man providing testimony against the primary target could not remain in the same space, for evidentiary reasons. She understood that. She had told herself she understood that before she'd watched him walk out the door with 2 of Han's people and felt something she hadn't anticipated, which was the specific quality of a room that was emptier than its square footage accounted for. She didn't examine that feeling. She filed it. What? Kwon Se-jun was arrested at 11:47 a.m. Not at his office, which was where Han's team went first. He was at his residence in Hanam-dong, a property 3 blocks from Taehyun's penthouse, which was either irony or geography. He had apparently been on the phone continuously since the preservation order landed, burning through his political contacts, calling in favors that had spent decades accumulating. Several of those calls were answered, several were not. The ones that were not answered told Kwon Se-jun everything about the structural integrity of an empire built on other people's fear. He came out of his residence under his own power, which Amara noted when Osei showed her the video that circulated on news channels by 1 p.m. A small man in an excellent suit, moving with the careful dignity of someone who had decided that the only thing left to control was how he walked to the car. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked straight ahead. He got into the vehicle without being forced. Amara watched the 12-second clip once. She did not watch it again. Malik called her at 2 p.m. He was at the Yongsan apartment with their mother, having been moved from the hospital with his IV equipment and his football tablet and the worn university hoodie, which he apparently refused to leave without. The hospital's clinical trial coordinator had been briefed and had expressed the particular brand of professional concern that translated, in practice, to a 24-hour treatment adjustment that would not affect the cycle's integrity. "The news is everywhere," he said. He sounded alert. More alert than he'd sounded in weeks, his voice carrying the particular energy of someone whose body was finally, incrementally, doing what it was supposed to do. "Kwon Se-jun, they're saying Kang Taehyun testified." "Yes." "You did it." She was sitting in a prosecutor's conference room surrounded by the paperwork of the morning, and she was exhausted in a way that had moved past her muscles into something deeper, some cellular level of tired that she suspected would take a long time to surface fully. "We did it," she said. A pause. "Are you okay?" "Ask me that in a week." "Amara." "I'm okay, Malik. I'm very tired and I'm okay." Another pause, longer. She could hear the apartment sounds behind him, their mother's movements, the muffled television news. "Dad would be," he started. "Don't," she said, gently. "Not yet. Let me just get through today." He was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said. "I love you." "I love you too." She pressed the phone against her ear for an extra second. "Watch your match." She heard him almost laugh. "There's no match on right now." "Watch the highlights then." She hung up and sat in the empty conference room and let herself feel, for approximately 90 seconds, the full accumulated weight of 7 years. Not all of it. She suspected that would take considerably longer than 90 seconds. But enough to know it was real, that the morning had been real, that the recorder and the testimony and Park Hyun-soo in an elevator lobby and Kwon Se-jun walking to a car with his dignity assembled around him like a last piece of armor had all been real. Then she stood up and went to find Han Ji-young, because there was still work to do. The formal charges against Kwon Se-jun were filed within 72 hours. Fraud. Financial crimes extending back 15 years. Conspiracy in the death of Chukwuemeka Okafor. The charges were specific and documented, and backed by an evidence package that Han Ji-young's team, now considerably larger, the prosecutor general, having discovered that he was very interested in this case after all, worked through without pause. Park Hyun-soo, faced with Oh's recording and two other witnesses who surfaced once the preservation order made clear that Kwon's ability to reach them had ended, gave a full statement on the third day. His statement named 4 other individuals in Kwon's organization. Those 4 individuals, understanding the geometry of their situation, gave further statements. The cascade had the quality of a structure that had been held together by proximity to power, and once the power was removed, the structure simply came apart at its own seams. The Canadian witness, the city planning official, testified via video link. His statement corroborated the financial records in the specific bureaucratic detail of a man who had signed documents he regretted and remembered every word of them. The families who had lost land in the Mapo corridor development, 11 in total, the Okafor property among them, were notified through their lawyers that the original deed fraud was being investigated and that restitution proceedings would follow. Amara received that notification on a Thursday afternoon and read it standing in the hallway of the Yongsan apartment while her mother cooked something in the kitchen that smelled like the meals of her childhood. She read the notification twice. Then she folded it and put it in her pocket and went into the kitchen and sat at the table and watched her mother cook without saying anything. And her mother looked at her once and then looked back at the stove and didn't say anything either, which was its own language, the one they'd been speaking since 2018, the one built from what couldn't yet be put into words. Us. Tae-hyun was held in a prosecutor's facility for 11 days before the cooperation agreement was formally executed and his legal status clarified. The agreement covered his voluntary testimony, his full disclosure of the Black Phoenix Syndicate's operations, and his active assistance in the dismantling of the organization's financial infrastructure, which was the part that took the longest, because it was the part that was most complex, and because he was, despite everything, the only person who fully understood how it had been constructed. He worked with prosecutors, financial investigators for 8 hours a day for 3 weeks. He named accounts, explained structures, identified the individuals who had been operating under his protection. Some of those individuals were arrested. Some cooperated in turn. Some, the ones who'd had no real choice about their involvement, the ones who'd been caught in the syndicate's gravity rather than seeking it, were treated with a degree of consideration that reflected, in small ways, the nature of the testimony Tae-hyun gave about them. Sungmin was one of those. Tae-hyun spent 40 minutes in one session explaining, specifically and on the record, the nature of Sungmin's role, what he'd been asked to do, what he'd refused, the moments where his judgment had run counter to orders and towards something better. Han Ji-young listened and wrote, and didn't make promises. But the prosecutor's recommendation in Sungmin's case was notably different from what it might otherwise have been. Sungmin never mentioned this, but 2 months later he appeared at the bakery on a Wednesday morning, bought a pastry from Adeyeze Okafor, and sat at the small table by the window for a while before leaving. Amara, who was in the back reviewing paperwork, heard her mother describe the customer afterward. Compact man, careful manners, ate the whole thing. She knew who it was, she didn't say so. Well, Tae-hyun was sentenced to 14 months. The cooperation agreement, the voluntary testimony, the active assistance in dismantling the organization, all of it was reflected in the sentencing recommendation, and the judge accepted it. 14 months, with credit for time already served in custody, and a significant financial penalty that consumed the majority of the assets he hadn't already surrendered in the dismantling process. He served 9 months. The penthouse was gone. The cars, the accounts, the 53rd floor office with its 3 walls of windows and its desk the size of a dining table, all of it gone. Not taken, exactly, though some of it was. Surrendered, which was different because he had been the one to open the vault and hand over the combination. He thought about this on the days when it was hardest, which were not the days he would have predicted. Not the first day when they put him in a facility that was not a cell exactly, but was not a room either, and the door locked in the way of a place designed to prevent departure. Not the early days of depositions and financial disclosure and the systematic accounting of everything he'd built. The hardest days were the ordinary ones in the middle, when there was nothing happening and nothing to do and no immediate pressure to move through. When the absence of the life he'd built was simply present, quiet and complete, and he sat with it. He read. More than he'd read since university. He thought about the shape of his own life in a way that wasn't productive or instrumental. Not planning, not calculating, just looking at it directly. The 17-year-old who had decided that control was the only reliable currency. The 23-year-old who had found his first patron in Kwon Sejun and told himself the arrangement was temporary. The 30-year-old who had made the first decision he couldn't undo. The accumulation of smaller and smaller silences that had built, over 20 years, into one enormous one. He thought about Busan, about the hotel room, about a phone call he'd answered and the questions he hadn't asked. He thought about Malik's hospital scan and the 2 words he'd sent to Amara. He's safe. He thought about her face in the conference room in the prosecutor's office, looking at the recorder in the center of the table. He wrote her 1 letter through Ose's office at the 3-month mark. He did not ask for anything. He said only that he hoped Malik's treatment was continuing to progress and that whatever she needed from him by way of additional documentation or testimony, she had only to indicate through the appropriate channel. She replied also through Ose's office, 6 days later. 1 paragraph. Malik's latest scan showed continued response. The restitution proceedings for the Mapo families were advancing. She was managing her mother's bakery accounts on weekends, which she described as unexpectedly complicated for a litigation attorney. She did not say anything that was personal, and she did not close with anything that was warm, but she had replied, and she had told him about the bakery, and he read the paragraph 4 times on the day it arrived, and then folded it and kept it. He walked out on a cold morning in early spring. The facility's exit was a plain door and a plain wall, which opened onto a plain street, and there was nothing ceremonial about it. No one came to unlock it in any meaningful way. A guard simply indicated the time, and he walked through it. He carried a bag that contained his clothes, the letter, and a book he'd read twice. He had no phone because his old number had been discontinued as part of the dismantling, and he hadn't set up a new one. He stood on the street for a moment. Seoul looked the same. That was the thing about cities. They absorbed everything without showing it. They continued their own enormous business, regardless of what happened inside any particular building or to any particular person. The traffic moved. The pedestrians moved. The morning light, thin and cold and specific to early spring in Korea, touched everything with the impartial quality of light that did not concern itself with what it illuminated. He heard someone say his name. He turned. Malik Okafor was standing 10 meters away, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. He was taller than Taehyun had expected. He'd seen photographs from Amara, another communication through the formal channel sent without explanation at the 8-month mark, showing a boy sitting up in a hospital bed without an IV line, giving a thumbs up to the camera. The boy in those photographs had been thin and young and still marked by what the treatment had cost his body. The person standing on this street was not that boy anymore. Not fully recovered, he was still thinner than he should have been. His face still carried the particular quality of someone who had been profoundly sick and was on the right side of it, but hadn't forgotten. But he was upright. He was present. He was holding 2 cups of coffee with the slightly awkward energy of a 17-year-old who had decided to do something and committed to it. "Hi," Malik said. Taehyun looked at him. "Hi," he said. Malik crossed the distance between them and held out one of the cups. "My sister said you take it black." Taehyun took the cup. It was warm. He wrapped both hands around it. "She told you to come. She told me where the facility was." Malik shrugged, a teenager's shrug, the gesture of someone who had developed the habit of understatement as a survival mechanism. "Coming was my idea." Taehyun looked at the coffee in his hands. "How's the treatment?" he said. "Done," Malik said. "Finished the cycle 2 months ago. They're monitoring, but..." Another shrug, this one carrying something more complicated underneath it. "They think it worked." He paused. "They think I'm going to be fine." The cold spring air sat around them on the plain street outside the plain door. "Good," Taehyun said. The word came out more plainly than he'd intended, without the managed quality he'd spent 20 years cultivating, and he let it. "My dad's land," Malik said. "They returned the deeds to my mom, as part of the restitution." He looked at the street, then back. She doesn't know what to do with it. It's a vacant lot now, basically. The development project got unwound. He paused. She's thinking about building something on it. She hasn't decided what. Taehyun nodded slowly. My sister's going back to New York, Malik said. Eventually, she extended her bar registration here through the end of the year because of the restitution proceedings and some other stuff she's managing, but eventually. He held his own cup without drinking from it. She wanted me to tell you that she's glad it ended the way it did. She said to use those words exactly. Taehyun considered those words, felt the weight of what they contained and what they deliberately did not. She's not coming, he said. No, Malik said, not unkindly, just plainly. But she said there's one more condition. He looked at the boy. One more condition. 1 week. Malik reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded piece of paper, which he held out. At my mom's bakery, she opened it last month. She's been baking her whole life. She just never had the space before. He shook the paper slightly until Taehyun took it. No bodyguards, no car, no title. My mom doesn't want your money, and she doesn't want an apology because she says apologies don't bake bread. A pause. She wants someone to do the early shift because she can't carry the flower deliveries anymore, and I'm supposed to start a university preparation course next month. Taehyun unfolded the paper. An address in Mapo district. He recognized the neighborhood, 4 blocks from the construction site. He looked at the address for a long moment. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket. Tell your mother I'll be there Monday, he said. Malik nodded. He finally drank from his coffee. He looked at Taehyun over the rim of the cup with their father's eyes, dark, direct, constitutionally incapable of letting you be less than honest. And Taehyun held the gaze without looking away. My sister isn't going to forgive you, Malik said. Not as a verdict, more like information being transmitted accurately. She's working on it. She doesn't say that, but I know her. She's working on what comes after being angry for that long. He paused. I just thought you should know. I know, Taehyun said. She's worth being patient for. He looked at the boy for a moment. I know that too. Malik nodded again, finished, the transaction of the morning accomplished. He turned to go, then stopped. The SUVs parked around the corner. She drove us. He looked back. She's not coming out, but she drove us. He let that land. Then he walked around the corner. Taehyun stood on the plain street with his coffee and the address in his pocket and the cold spring morning around him. After a moment, he walked to the corner. The SUV was a few meters down, old, gray, the kind of vehicle that prioritized function over statement. Through the windshield, he could see Amara in the driver's seat. She was looking straight ahead, not at him. He couldn't tell if she knew he was there. He stood at the corner for a moment. Then he walked toward the vehicle. He stopped beside the driver's window. She didn't look at him immediately. A full beat, 2, the length of someone deciding, and then she turned her head and looked at him directly. She looked tired. Not the desperate, wired exhaustion of the prosecutor's conference room. This was something that had settled, the tiredness of a year of extraordinary effort that the body was now finally being allowed to acknowledge. Her face was the same face it had always been, precise, controlled, the thing underneath visible only in the quality of the stillness rather than any expression. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. He reached out and put his palm briefly against the glass. Not dramatic, not romantic, just contact, the specific kind that acknowledged the glass between them without pretending it wasn't there. She looked at his hand. Then she looked at his face. She gave one short nod. He lowered his hand, stepped back, turned and walked away from the vehicle, toward the street that would take him to a bus and then to the bakery neighborhood in Mapo, because he had no car and no driver and nowhere else to be. Behind him, he heard the SUV start. He didn't look back. The bakery was small. It occupied the ground floor of a narrow building 2 streets from the Han River, in the kind of Mapo neighborhood that had survived the development pressures of the last decade by virtue of being slightly too small and slightly too old to be worth the trouble of demolishing. The sign above the door was hand-painted, the name in both Hangul and Igbo, the kind of sign made by someone for whom it mattered that both were present. The windows were warm. Inside, through the glass, the early morning light turned everything amber. Adayeze Okafor was behind the counter when Taehyun walked in on Monday at 5:45 a.m. She was a substantial woman, not large but solid, with the quality of someone built from good materials and long use. She had Malik's eyes and Amara's precision and a face that held everything that had happened to her family without either hiding it or being destroyed by it. She looked at Taehyun when the door opened, and she looked at him the way people looked at complicated things. Directly, without either welcome or hostility, with the full attention of someone deciding what something actually was. He stood in the doorway. "The flower delivery comes at 6, she said. "The bags are 40 kilos each. There's a trolley in the back." She looked at him a moment more. "You know how to wash your hands?" "Yes," he said. "Then start there." He came inside. The door closed behind him. The bakery smelled like yeast and warm sugar and the particular combination of Korean and West African baking traditions that Adayeze had apparently been developing for 40 years and that had no name except what it was. He found the sink in the back. He washed his hands. The flour delivery arrived at 6:03. Taehyun used the trolley for 3 bags and then set it aside because the backloading space was too narrow and it was faster to carry them directly once you got the balance right. The bags were 40 kilos and heavy in the specific way of things that didn't accommodate being managed, only carried. His back felt it by the 4th bag. He carried 12. Adayeze watched him on the 3rd bag and said nothing. By the 5th, she had turned back to the dough she was working and didn't look again. He understood that was its own form of acceptance. He worked the early shift for 7 days. He learned which loaves needed to go in at what time and why. He learned that Adayeze Okafor had strong opinions about the resting time for enriched doughs and would state these opinions without preamble or invitation if she observed them being violated. He learned that she accepted payment from exactly no one for the bread she left at the side door for 2 elderly neighbors who came at opening, and that she would not discuss this. He learned that she could carry on a 20-minute conversation with a customer in Korean and then immediately shift to Igbo for a phone call with her sister in Lagos and then back to Korean, and that she did this the way she breathed, without noticing. On the 4th day, she put a bowl of soup in front of him at noon without being asked. He ate it. She sat across from him with her own bowl, and they ate in the silence of people who had arrived, through completely different routes, at the same kitchen table. "My husband," she said at one point. He looked up. "He told me once, before all of it, he said the problem with men who take things is they think what they take becomes theirs." She turned her spoon in the bowl. "He said nothing belongs to you that you didn't build with someone else." She looked up. "He was talking about business, but I think it was about more than that." Taehyun held her gaze. "Yes," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to her soup. On the 7th day, at closing time, Amara came in. She didn't announce herself. The door opened and she was there, in the charcoal coat, the same coat she'd worn when she walked into his office and into the cafe and driven Malik to the facility on a cold spring morning. She looked around the bakery, at the clean counter, the stacked trays, her mother moving through the closing routine with the systematic efficiency of someone who'd been doing it for weeks. At Taehyun, standing by the flour shelf with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, flour on his forearm that he hadn't noticed. She looked at the flour on his forearm. Something moved in her face. Brief, unguarded, in the way things were when you saw something unexpected and your face responded before you could decide whether to let it. Then it was gone. "How was the week?" she said. "Your mother's soups are better than her bread," he said. "Don't tell her I said that." Adayeze from the back said, "I heard that." She didn't emerge. There was a sound of something being put away. Amara looked at him. He looked at her. She crossed the bakery and sat at the small table by the window. He sat across from her. Outside, the Mapo street was doing its early evening thing. The end-of-day foot traffic, the delivery bikes, the ordinary life of a neighborhood that had outlasted several rounds of people trying to develop it into something else. "The restitution for the Mapo families finalized this week," she said. "All 11, my mother's parcel included." She set her hands on the table. "The vacant lot where the building was." "I know," he said. "I saw the notification. Han's office copied me on the final order." She nodded. "She's going to plant it. My mother. She asked the neighbors what they wanted on the corner. They said a garden. She paused. So a garden. He thought about Chukwuemeka Okafor, who had refused to sell, who had said that when someone tries to take something from you, you don't fix it by giving it to them, who had been right in the end, in the way that people were right when it cost them everything, a garden on the corner where his building had been. That's right, Taehyun said. She looked at him directly. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. That's honest. I'm practicing, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked out the window. The street. The ordinary evening. The city that kept moving regardless. I'm not going to tell you it's enough, she said. What you did. The testimony, the dismantling, the months cooperating. I'm not going to tell you it balances. She kept looking at the window. I don't think it balances. I don't think there's a version of the accounting where it balances. No, he said, but I've been thinking about what my father said, what Malik told me he said. She turned back from the window. Her eyes were direct and clear and held the particular quality they'd always held, seeing things as they were rather than as would be convenient. About building things with someone else. She paused. I think he meant that the only things that last are the ones that cost you something real. Not money, not power. A pause. The willingness to be changed by what you did wrong. He looked at her. At the woman who had walked into his office with a folder and 7 years of controlled fury and had offered him, of all things, a structure for accountability. Who had sat across from him in 7 months of meetings and never once let him off the hook and never once been cruel about it. Who had held the recorder in the prosecutor's conference room and kept her hands completely steady. I'm not going to pretend I'm a different person, he said. I know who I was. I know, she said. That's not what I'm asking. What are you asking? She was quiet for a moment. I'm not asking anything, she said. I'm tired of being angry. I've been angry for 7 years and it's done most of what it can do and now I'm just tired. She looked at the table surface between them. I don't know what's on the other side of that. I'm going to find out. He nodded. You should too, she said. Not an invitation, not a closing. The way you told someone a true thing when you'd stopped needing them to do anything in particular with it. Arieze appeared from the back with her coat and her keys and looked at both of them at the table with the particular look of a woman who had raised Amara Okafor and understood when a conversation needed to finish on its own time. I'm locking up, she said. You two can stay 5 minutes. She went out the front door. It closed behind her. The bakery was quiet. The warm, flower-scented, amber-windowed quiet of a small room at the end of a day, with the street outside going on in its indifferent and ordinary way. 5 minutes. They sat at the small table for all 5 of them. They didn't say much. Outside, the garden was already being imagined on a corner in Mapo, the shape of something growing in the space where something had been taken. Inside, 2 people sat in the particular silence of those who have been through the same fire from opposite sides, and come out the other end of it, not unchanged, not unbroken, not even yet fully healed, but present, and breathing, and still. Amara stood. She picked up her coat. She looked at him once more, one full, direct look, the kind that held everything and asked for nothing. Monday, she said. He looked at her. The early shift, she said. My mother needs someone for the flower. She walked to the door, put her hand on it. Paused for a moment with her back to him, the charcoal coat and the particular stillness of someone who has made a decision and is standing inside the weight of it. Then she pushed the door open and walked out into the Mapo evening, and Seoul received her the way it received everything, without ceremony, without judgment, the city moving on in its enormous ordinary life. Taehyun sat alone in the bakery for another minute. He looked at the window, at the street, at the light. Then he stood, put on his jacket, and rolled down his sleeves, covering the flower on his forearm. He turned off the interior light. He locked the door with the key Arieze had left on the counter. He stood outside on the Mapo street in the cold spring evening with the key in his hand. 4 blocks away, a vacant corner lot sat quiet in the early dark. In a few weeks there would be soil turned and seeds put in, and the first uncertain green of something choosing to grow in ground that had been, until very recently, a place where a man's refusal to surrender had cost him everything, And then, slowly and at an enormous price, had cost the people who took from him even more. He put the key in his pocket. He walked. The empire was gone. The fear was gone. The 53 floors of glass and authority and controlled distance from every true thing, gone. Ahead was a street, a neighborhood, a bakery that opened at 6, a mother who made soup without being asked, a boy with his father's eyes who would start university preparation in a month, and a woman who was tired of being angry and was finding out what came next. It was not redemption. He knew that. Redemption was a word that closed things too neatly, that suggested a point of arrival where the accounting finally settled. He didn't believe in that point, but he believed in Monday, in the flour delivery at 6, in the 40-kilo bags and the trolley, and the work that was just work, that asked nothing of you except that you show up and do it. He believed in the possibility of becoming, slowly and without guarantee, someone worthy of the trust of the people who had chosen to leave the door open. That was enough. That was, it turned out, more than he had ever had. He walked until the street turned and Seoul turned with him, and the night came in full, and somewhere behind him the bakery window went dark, and somewhere ahead the corner lot waited in the dark for spring to find it. And it would.